it's hard to execute the wrong strategy. But even having the right strategy and the right execution doesn't guarantee success, because all this is done in the context of the marketplace and the environment, and your competitors are doing something against you as well. But to have the right strategy increases your chances of success. A company can manage to have both ongoing long-term superior financial performance and at the same time make strategic transformations if it's created really two separate systems. Because really, to maintain ongoing financial performance, it needs one system to focus on operations, to focus on the short term, and to focus on the existing strategy. But to change, of course, it needs a different system that allows for change. Now, in the extensive study that we did, we found 4 processes that companies need to put in. On the one hand, they need to have a process, or tradition as we call it, of continuity, because of course you must have some continuity in your strategy before you can change it sensibly. But then secondly, they need a process for anticipating the need for strategy changes. This also means having an open mindset to understand that the current business model, however successful it might be, is not necessarily the one that will continue to be successful when the environment changes. So related to that then is a third tradition that we call contestation, or the willingness to accept disagreement and conflict in the company, so that managers can challenge the existing way of doing things, the existing strategic model. And what we also found was that combined with this was something that we call happy accidents. So of course, random events, problems occur for all kinds of companies, but the successful companies are those who have this tradition of anticipation and of constructive contestation that allows them to exploit the happy accidents in their favor rather than working against them. And then the fourth tradition is mobility, so that they can bring in fresh blood from outside and also promote people with a different viewpoint inside the company. So those are the 4 traditions that we found that allow companies to both maintain ongoing superior financial performance and make significant strategic transformations at the same time. Companies find it inherently difficult to change, just like human beings do as well. For companies, success means that they get locked into their current business model and the way that they do things. So they have a mindset of this is the way we do it. And then there are also then organizational and political barriers to change. Think about who gets to the top of a company. It's the people who have operated the existing business model. So when the environment changes, they find it very hard to change what they're doing. The classic example actually is IBM, which found it very difficult to change from the mainframe computer model to the personal computer model. Or for that matter, General Motors, which found it very hard to change from the era of large gas-guzzling cars to economical cars. And in fact, eventually, General Motors essentially went bankrupt, had to be bailed out by the US government. And that was a 30-year process of failure to change. Well, our study was based on British companies. So we started out by analyzing the 20-year financial performance of 215 of the largest publicly listed British companies. Of the 215, we found that only 28 qualified as having had superior financial performance over 20 years. And in fact, it wasn't just beginning to end, but annual, every year doing well compared with their international peers. From the 28, we then examined how many of those also managed major strategic transformations. And of those, we found only 6. So that's down to 6 out of 215 had both superior financial performance and strategic transformation. Then of the 6, we chose 3 for further in-depth study. These were Tesco, the retailer, which is now one of the very largest supermarket retailers in the world. Cadbury Schweppes, which was one of the highly successful confectionery and soft drinks companies, and Smith & Nephew, which makes medical devices and other medical related products. We then compared these 3 companies. In each case, we paired them with a comparator. Sort of they were the gold medal winners. We compared them with bronze medal winners. Not losers, but bronze medals. So Tesco versus Sainsbury, an older company that they overtook. Cadbury Schweppes versus Unilever, a much larger consumer products company. And Smith & Nephew versus SSL International, another sort of healthcare related diversified company. So these three companies, over a period actually of decades, made some significant transformations. Perhaps the most dramatic one is Tesco, which started out literally selling on the street. The founder, Jack Cohen, had a store on the street. So are there lessons about strategic transformation for Chinese companies? Well, interestingly, unfortunately for Chinese companies, they're rather bad at some of the things that you need. Chinese companies are not very good at strategic continuity. They love to diversify into unrelated businesses. Chinese companies are not very good at contestation. The boss-oriented culture means that they find it hard to have lower levels of managers challenge what is the strategy at the top. So that makes it difficult for them. And I think particularly when we look at the transformation of state-owned enterprises, it's really important that Chinese companies learn how to strategically transform themselves. If we look at a couple of examples, I think Bao Steel is one that has successfully transformed itself, and similarly ICBC, the bank, has successfully transformed itself. So Wuhan Steel is an example of a Chinese company that really doesn't have a tradition of strategic continuity or ability to transform itself. So because it found that pig farming was more profitable than making steel and screws, it created this 10,000 pigs, the 10,000 pig farms strategy, which really is not the right way for it to go. One of the things we studied in the book was the role of leaders. Now, it is very popular to believe that companies are successful because of the leader. And of course, there are some dramatic examples like Steve Jobs at Apple. But really, we have to recognize that leaders are not the whole story, and that they have to create the context for the company to succeed. So leaders are important, but more really for setting the context than for making dramatic strategic changes. Now, in China, the tradition has been for the boss to really make the decisions. But as the Chinese economy modernizes and Chinese companies become modern and they become more global, I think the boss has to take a back seat, not make the decisions himself or herself, but to set the strategic and organizational context for managers to make the right decisions and to implement them.